First one is from LB. It says, on topic, it would take for the atheists and theists to establish what evidence is for the either side, more so on the atheist because evidence is a broad term. So I get what you're saying there. This is something I've actually been debating with fellow atheists recently. Andy also joined in. He's I suppose we call him a friend of air. He doesn't write any articles, but he's been on our podcast and things like that. He's been joining in a couple of those discussions with me. So you have to ask yourself, what is evidence? Now, in its most simplistic form, evidence is something indicative of a conclusion. So whether it's information or facts or anything like that. Now, it doesn't necessarily make it good evidence. It doesn't make it strong evidence. It doesn't make it convincing evidence. It doesn't make it scientific evidence, but something that is indicative of a conclusion is evidence. So the Bible is evidence of the Abrahamic faith. The Quran is evidence of the Islamic faith. The Vedas is evidence of the Hindu faith. Now, we can already see an issue here where we've got three different holy books that seem to somewhat contradict each other and make different claims within them, or at least people make different claims about them. So from here, we can say, okay, maybe this evidence isn't necessarily good evidence. We can even look at the evidence and examine the claims within it, or that people make about things within it, and go, right, okay, well, this seems to contradict that, and this is historically inaccurate here, and there's nothing to support this bit, and so on and so forth. I mean, if you think about arguments like we brought up the other day, the evidential problem of evil, it sort of demonstrates that a claim of a god being a perfectly loving god, well, if we consider the evidential problem of evil, well, no, it can't be. So we then go, okay, we throw that bit out. Doesn't mean it wasn't evidence. It means it's evidence that we discount because of this particular argument. The problem I think that you will find with the average atheist on the internet, the evidence they want is scientific evidence. And it's really hard to get scientific evidence which examines the physical for something that is usually regarded as a completely metaphysical claim. You could maybe go and try and judge effects that they make, maybe try and judge the efficacy of prayer and things like that. But in general, with you can't have scientific evidence for something that isn't scientific. So that's one of the biggest reasons that theists and atheists are constantly talking past each other on that topic. Dave and I actually, it was many streams ago, back in the days where I think we were just going straight out of Discord and I had no clue what was going on. I pretend I do now. Where we were talking about what would we accept for evidence of a god, and it would have to be something so extraordinary, like a baby being born able to speak in every language and recount the particular holy book and explain all the things in the holy book. Something like that we'd have to go, wow, okay, I cannot see any way this would happen if it wasn't for a god. And, that would be something that would probably convince us that, shit, you know what, we've been wrong in our atheism all this time. But equally, I don't think it's something that you'd get from a god, especially if you think about a more deistic claim of a god. Now, something like that, I don't think there's any way you could get evidence to support that particular claim. It's a very difficult one. Do you have anything to add to that, Dave?
Yeah, I think something that a lot of people forget as well is that in some regards, evidence is a very personal thing. It's a very subjective thing. I know lots of atheists, it's kind of weird. A lot of them will say, such and such is subjective because two people disagree. They'll make arguments like that. If something was objective, think of morals, for example. Well, two people think different things about morality, therefore that's proof that morality is subjective. But they'll argue that evidence is testable and repeatable. They'll come up with all those kind of scientific definitions and say that anything else isn't evidence. So they don't apply that, well, two people disagree on what evidence is, so therefore evidence is subjective. But in a sense, it kind of is, because what might be evidence to me might not be evidence to you. And it depends on our experiences and how we define what evidence is. In certain technical circumstances, evidence might not be as subjective. But when it comes to actually internalizing it, there is a very much a subjective element to what would be considered evidence.
No, I agree there. I had a very similar conversation just before I came on stream tonight with someone who said that to them, their evidence for God was about their personal experience until they became an atheist and realized that that was not evidence. And I said, well, hang on a minute. I think that your experience was evidence. It's not necessarily particularly strong evidence, and it's not going to be evidence that convinces anyone else, but it convinced you. So therefore it was indicative of a conclusion, and it convinced you. And I said, I gave a comparison of, if I experience something, say eating a chocolate bar, and I go, oh yeah, I like that, that is evidence to me that I actually like that chocolate bar. But now that might not be evidence that Dave will like a chocolate bar. I mean, he does, but it's not necessarily going to be evidence that he does. So, it might pique his interest and go, well, maybe I should try the chocolate bar for myself, but it's not necessarily going to tell him that he will do it. So experience is a form of evidence. It's just not a particularly good form of evidence if you're trying to give it to someone else. A personal experience will not necessarily convince anyone else.
It's not necessarily transferable evidence.
Yes.
Which is what a lot of atheists seem to be declaring is the only form of evidence now.
Yeah. If it's not
It must be
transferable, it's not
transferable.
evidence.
Yeah. You must be able to demonstrate it, repeat it, everything like that. Otherwise, it's not evidence. But that's not necessarily the case for what evidence is. It's a technical form of evidence, but not evidence in general.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.